No woman had a rib sawn out for a smaller waist. There is no historical record of it, anywhere. Here is what everyone knows. The corset snapped ribs, crushed organs, and dropped women onto fainting couches. None of this survives contact with the evidence. This is the corset. Earlier called stays, it is a fitted, boned, laced foundation garment. We are going to take the 3 most famous claims about this piece of clothing and test each one against surviving museum records and bioarchaeology. Because stripped of the horror stories, the corset was an ordinary item in a woman's wardrobe. It was the essential foundation that quietly held everything else up. Start with the loudest claim: the belief that Victorian women routinely elected to have their lower ribs removed to achieve an extreme waist. When fashion historian Valerie Steele and physician Lynn Kutsche searched the 19th century medical literature for proof of this operation, they found nothing. Not a single recorded instance. Think about what surgery on the chest meant before reliable anesthesia and antisepsis arrived in the middle of the century. Opening the body was a near-death event. Electing to have ribs cut out for fashion would have been choosing to die. But this is where the myth hides a grain of truth. Wearing a tight corset constantly, for years, from a young age, can gradually reshape the lowest floating ribs. Skeletons studied by bioarchaeologists show exactly that. There is a strict biological difference between slow, prolonged pressure and a surgeon's saw. The body bends and adapts over time. It is not amputated. Since no doctor was cutting women open to take an inch off their waist, the baseline assumption of the corset as a tool of bodily mutilation fails the historical record. That brings us to the second claim: the image of the corset as an unyielding iron cage that crushed internal organs. The stiffening material everyone pictures as rigid metal or bone was actually baleen, whalebone, which is a flexible, springy keratin, the exact same material as your fingernails. When baleen warms against the body, it doesn't fight the wearer. It flexes and molds to the individual shape. This flexibility allowed the corset to do its actual job, acting as a load-bearing foundation. A Victorian woman wore layers of heavy skirts and petticoats. The corset took that massive weight off the hips and spread it evenly across the torso, while supporting the back and bust. This animation demonstrates what modern imaging studies find when they scan habitual corset wearers. The internal organs shift mildly. The stomach and liver are compressed in a way that closely mirrors the natural organ displacement that happens during pregnancy. Genuine harm did happen. When a small minority of women took tight lacing to extremes, they suffered real breathlessness and lasting effects, which period doctors carefully documented. But a minority practice is not the daily norm. For most, the corset was simply a supportive garment. It did the exact job a bra and girdle do today. So if the garments were practical, where did we get the idea that every Victorian woman laced herself down to a microscopic wasp waist? We got it from illustrations. Fashion plates from the era were highly stylized drawings designed to sell a specific, exaggerated ideal, not to document real living bodies. The cinched proportions shown in these drawings were physically impossible for normal human anatomy to achieve. Even the most astonishing studio photographs of tiny waists were illusions. They relied on posture, dark garments against painted backdrops, and quiet retouching. If you'd like to see more investigations into the true history of foundation garments, subscribe to the channel for our new season, Underneath. These images were printed, circulated, and preserved precisely because they were freakish and extraordinary. Over time, that extreme exception tricked future generations into believing it was the daily rule. The final piece of the modern myth comes directly from a political campaign. The 19th century dress reform movement thought heavily against the corset on moral and health grounds. They produced vivid warning imagery, drawing cross-sections of crushed internal organs and swooning women. This was advocacy designed to win an argument, not an objective study of everyday clothing. The 20th century accidentally inherited those campaign posters rather than the garments themselves. We folded the political rhetoric and the surgical lies together into one neat, cartoonish memory of historical suffering. To find the truth, you have to look at the physical archives. The Symington collection in Leicestershire holds thousands of records showing how corsets were actually mass-produced for the public. These surviving everyday garments reveal practical, durable construction. They were cut and stitched to fit a wide spectrum of normal, living, working bodies. The idea that women casually sawed off their ribs tells us nothing about the Victorian corset. Instead, it shows how eagerly we will believe the absolute worst about the past and the women who lived in it. Think of one fact you have always blindly believed about historical clothing. Name it in the comments. The best ones become films. Read the seam, not the rumor. See you next time.